everyone, and welcome back to the Tree of Life podcast. My name is Jacob Totson, and this is Kubi May. Well, I'm not Kubi May. She's Kubi May. Kubi, how are you?
I'm good. Enjoying this glorious day at the Abbey. It's just, so sunny, and it feels like summer's actually landed. It's here. It looks nice where you are too.
Yeah. So for those watching on a video podcast, we're obviously not in the same place anymore, sadly. It is really sad. Like our last two episodes were in Glastonbury, which doesn't feel like it was only one episode ago.
No, it's gone
really weird.
fast. Really fast.
Yeah, it's only been a month since we saw each other, but it feels like so much longer than that.
Yeah.
But summer is here.
Yes, thank goodness at last. And coming up to the solstice, 21st. So it should be here, right? Instead of all this rain.
Yeah, I mean, my entire month in Glastonbury, I think I saw, 4 days of sun or something like that. It was just rain the entire month.
Such a shame, wasn't it? Yeah. What's it like being back in the US?
It's really weird. But I mean, I'm definitely, there's a part of me that's glad to be back. I was looking forward to coming back and kind of slowing down a little bit. It was really busy these last few months. But Glastonbury was, I'll say Glastonbury was the height of the travel. I really enjoyed my time there.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah, it was nice having you here. It was good fun.
Yeah, but the podcast continues, so we'll bring the magic of Glastonbury once a month to everyone, and you'll restore my love for it when I talk to you once a month.
Exactly.
Yeah, so our theme today, I guess, was going to be the solstice and midsummer then, and then we'll talk about our two retreats that just occurred as well.
Yeah. Oh, this is like the moment for you, isn't it? Because there's only really two kind of Norse celebrations for the wheel of the year.
I don't know if it's the moment for me because of my super pale skin. I'll be quite red after we're done recording. I think if you do a time lapse of the video, you'll see me just progressively become more red by the end.
Oh no! Yeah, you're definitely more Viking, aren't you? Really?
Yeah.
Deep
Well,
down in the ancestry.
The freckles will come together at some point and form a mega freckle, and I will become invulnerable to the sun. But yeah, Midsummer, it's interesting because, I just celebrated Bealtaine in Ireland at the Fire Festival there, like, oh my gosh, only 2.5 weeks ago. And it is interesting because I do find that, Midsummer is very similar to Beltane and Bealtaine for the reason they're celebrated.
Yeah. Absolutely, because Beltane is named after Belenus, which is the god of the sun, right? And here we are in the height of the sun. People always ask, who's the main god to worship for summer solstice, and it's not so clear actually with the kind of Celtic pagan stuff. But I would always say more kind of Belenus, and we're sort of in between Lu, which is another god of light. So, but yeah, you would have experienced that firsthand, right, in Ireland.
Yeah, I think remembering correctly, the main point of like worship that there was like a deity brought up was Eru, was the main one brought up at Ishnok, and I think it's because it was more of a celebration of Ireland, like the spirituality of Ireland, more so than the seasonal change, I think.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I think it's like, I think it's like their Independence Day, like their July 4th, their celebration of the country's identity, I think is what it was.
Oh, okay. Yeah, nice. So what's the midsummer? What would typically happen for the kind of Nordic midsummer celebrations? Because I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, I think, historically we have very little information. It's mentioned as a date, just like Yule is. Like it's mentioned, at midsummer we'll do this. But I think the best way to look at what midsummer was is what it still is today. And I think that's the most fascinating thing about midsummer is it's still the most popular holiday in Sweden next to Yule. And so it really hasn't changed that much. And it never really got overly Christianized. So it still maintained a lot of its traditional like folk customs. So I did do a full video where I interviewed my Swedish friend Lynn last year about midsummer. And the main thing is it's just kind of like a family get together with bonfires, of course, but lots of food, drinking, and just celebrating summer, because I think really, when we look at these summer celebrations, you look at Beltane and Bjaltana, it happens in May because that's when summer really begins in the Isles. But midsummer is when the summer really begins in Scandinavia because it's further north. So it's really just a general celebration of like, hey, the winter, the rain, the clouds, it's finally over. So let's get out and celebrate what life is.
So a celebration of life, really, the kind of vitality and zest of life and everything coming to its full fruition, I suppose, is it?
Yeah, because I mean, I'm sure we've talked about it in person, and if not on the podcast, is just the madness that is airplanes flying above me. So hopefully that's not too loud. But you know, the madness that is the midsummer sun is how long the sun lasts, and just being there at midnight and seeing the sun still pretty high in the sky, and then maybe getting kind of dusky for like an hour and then having full sun again. It really does something to your mind, realizing that the
Yeah,
days
right. All
are
the
endless.
serotonin.
Yeah, and not. I mean, it's similar in England. Like, when's the sunset right now for you?
It's about 9 o'clock at the moment.
Really?
Sunset about 9 o'clock. Yeah,
Oh,
which is really nice. You've got
oh,
these
it's
really
got to be
lovely
later than that. Kubi, I don't think you have a perception of time.
it must be between nine
It's
and half
it's
max
got to
at
be
the moment.
it's got to be like 10:30 there by now. Which I guess you are
Really?
further south.
Yeah, as it gets closer to the 21st, I think it gets more towards 10.
Yeah, let's see here.
Maybe, yeah, maybe I.
Yeah, it says 9:30, but yeah, I figured it'd be later because it's about 9:30 here as well.
Yeah,
But you are quite a bit further south than like Scotland, because like Scotland, you know, I was just up there, you know, 4 days ago, and the sun was setting at like, I mean, it wouldn't get dark until about 11 already.
right.
Yeah, like it'd still be like, you know, it would get dark for a few hours, but yeah, it wouldn't really get there until about 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah. Oh wow. So that's, yeah, I suppose that's it, isn't it? If you think about how our ancestors would have responded to that, these beautiful long days in the fields and coming together at night because it's still warm and you can gather outside for longer. It would have been just beautiful long days, feeling the full vitality of life.
Oh yeah, for sure. And especially after how dark and dreary the winters are in the northern world is, you know, you would just have these polar opposites of everyday clouds and rain, sometimes snow, to every day so much light, so much energy. So of course there's going to be a celebration that kind of marks that transition.
Yeah. And with the Norse traditions, do you find that there is a real focus around the celebration of fire as a representative of the sun?
I don't, that's kind of hard to place, because again, when you look at like the written source materials, there's not a lot of mentioning of it. But we do know that, like, again, with like the Bronze Age, they had the sun cults that existed at that time. But by the Viking Age, the sun cults had really died off. And so it's just really hard to say, you know, definitively what those celebrations were about. But obviously, just as a general human thing, fire and sun are very, you know, common themes. And so the fact that we do have bonfires on Midsummer, you can kind of make a pretty serious conclusion that it was probably related to the sun.
Yeah, it's pretty definite.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
And what
But
about the deities, like the main gods and or goddesses of Midsummer? What would they be for the Norse world?
well, yeah, again, like historically, there's really no information that survives. We can imply what would have been important because we have to look at what people would have been doing at this time. And
Yeah.
during most of the deities that we know about when it comes to like the Norse pantheon, it would have been agricultural deities or war deities. Um, and this is something I've been working on for a while. It's kind of like a timeline of the gods and the evolution of where deities come from. And, you know, like the hunter-gatherer gods in the Norse pantheon, such as Ul or Skadi, obviously were losing prominence in the later periods towards the Viking Age because they were moving further away from the hunter-gatherer period and moving into the agricultural period. So the agricultural deities are more recorded in the source material because it was later into the history of like Norse mythology. And
Oh,
but
of course.
also, yeah, but also the war deities. So that's why we know so much about Odin and Thor, is because at the time of the Viking Age, when most things were getting recorded as far as oral stories into the later period, it was a warring time. And so there was more emphasis on the high kings, the high gods. Whereas during the agricultural periods, which is what Midsummer is more about, you would have had more of an emphasis on the agricultural gods, so deities such as Freyr, Freya, and possibly the Njord, because one of the things that Saxo Grammaticus talks about is kind of like his weird pseudo history of the Norse world, and he kind of makes the Norse gods individual kings and rulers of, I think, Asgard, or maybe it's Uppsala. I can't remember off the top of my head. But he kind of gives this list of, for so many years Njord ruled, so many years Freyr ruled, so many years Freya ruled, and they had, prosperous good years. And so even though that maybe the pseudo history that he created isn't necessarily correct, or maybe it is, we still see this emphasis on the kings that of Njord, Freyr, Freya. These kings were considered good because they had years of peace and prosperity. And so I think Midsummer would have been a celebration of peace and prosperity, whereas Yule fell more into the magic, the death, the darkness, and more of the heavy subject matter, and is more associated with deities such as Odin, like the high god, so to speak.
Yeah. Wow, it's fascinating. I love the idea of the gods doing shifts, handing over each era.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like quite an organized system as well.
Yeah, for sure. I was sitting down. I've been contemplating what I want my next book to be, and I think the next one I think I'm going to call like The Religion of Nature, I think, or something like that. And I'm kind of going to go walk through that progression of how we developed deities or became in contact with this identity of deities through our progression as a society. And it's kind of walk through the beginning times all the way through to where we are now, and thinking about, well, what gods do we celebrate now? And it's like we've kind of become in this era of the self, which is really weird. And so I feel like we've started worshiping the self too much in recent years.
Yeah. In those times, it would have been, you live your life for others, for whether it's for the land or the tribe, but most importantly for the gods. So is the kind of problems that we see now, which come with these kind of egoic aspects of self, wouldn't have been so sort of prevalent back then.
Yeah, for sure. Just the identity of the self is just not something we really see until more into the modern era, so to speak. Yeah, I think there was starting to be that concept in like the Roman times, like anytime like a big empire was starting to come up, like anywhere in the world, I think we see more and more of the identity of the self. The more, people reflecting on their achievements, their accomplishments, what they're doing with their life, leaving behind, statues of themselves, making sure they wrote about themselves. Just the idea of writing about yourself is a really weird thing to the ancient history. Like you had had people write about you or sing stories about you, but I'm so egotistical. I'm gonna write about the story of my life. That's kind of weird, actually.
It is when you think about it. And of course, because there was nothing written down, everything was oral tradition. You're right. It would have been, I wonder if people had stories about themselves that they shared orally instead. Do you think?
Well, there's the concept of like flighting and boasting. I think it's maybe a little bit more of a concept in neo-paganism and like the Viking craze, but it's still the idea of like, getting together and boasting your deeds. And we all do this. I think this is a human thing, is, especially, macho men get together and they're like, ooh, like I fought 10 men yesterday. Well, I fought 12 men. So I think that's always been a part of humanity to some degree.
Yeah. It's so fascinating, isn't it? So, yeah, and I suppose that does bring us quite nicely to the theme of solstice, because it's not just celebrating the vitality of the land, but it's also the life force in one another. At least in the kind of Celtic pagan world, the Druids call it Alban-Hefir, which it means the light of the sun. But it's talked about as though the sort of the world sun, like the life of the light of the natural world, but also the zest of life within us, that
Ooh,
life
the
force.
zest.
There's a few little traditions that were passed down from the Celtic kind of pagan folklore, things like that they would have created fires on the top of hills to be closer to the sun, to represent the sun at its peak, and the idea of channeling that down by they would have like lit strands or bands, they call it, a fire, and whipped it around their heads, these burning kind of bands of fire. The idea of channeling it or kind of bringing it into the body. And there's a few little stories about wheels of fire being rolled down hills, and certain herbs being gathered for the strength and vitality within them at this time. So things like St. John's wort and vervain were harvested by the Druids at Midsummer.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and the idea that any seeds that were scattered across the land at this time would be charged with the energy of the sun and that vitality.
Yeah,
So
well, you just
there's a lot
reminded
about
me that one of the things I was told by Lynn, I'm not going to get the exact number of these things right because I don't remember off the top of my head, but essentially there was a lot of folklore around Midsummer, a lot of folk tales and things like that. And like one of them is if you want to attract a lover, that you need to go to like 7 fields in the night of the midsummer sun and collect flowers from them in silence and then like weave a crown out of the flowers and then present it to your lover.
Oh, that's so gorgeous,
And I
isn't
can't remember
it?
the exact number or the exact amount, but yeah, there was something along
Yeah.
those lines.
Oh, these old lovely traditions that we just seem to. That'd be really nice, wouldn't it, to do that? These like as a gathering of people, maybe doing all of it in silence together and weaving
Yeah.
together.
Well, if you think about it too, in the ancient past, especially in Scandinavia of all places, because Scandinavian winters are harsh. Maybe a little less so in Denmark. Denmark's a little bit more similar to like England and Scotland, is it's a little bit more just dreary. But winters in Sweden and Norway are brutal. And so during the winter months, you would have not had much contact with the other towns, the other farms. You wouldn't have been intermingling a lot. Like there would have been some degree, but nowhere near as much as the summer. So if you were looking for a lover, if you were looking for a wife or a partner or a husband, you wouldn't have been doing it during the winter time because you wouldn't be traveling to the different villages to find a partner. But during the summer, there was more ability to travel. And so that would have been the time to go find a partner to settle down with. And just like with Beltane, you have this kind of promiscuous idea of what Beltane is. But I think Midsummer has that to some degree as well. Is this idea of people essentially hooking up, getting together in the summer because they're able to. And so I think there is a lot of mythos and folk
Yeah,
around finding lovers during this time of year.
romance of it all. Yeah, so gorgeous. I love that. And I was going to ask, who would be the equivalent of a sun god in the Norse world? We've got Belenus or Lu, perhaps over here.
Yeah, it could be a toss-up. So technically, just Suna or Sol would be, similar enough, but we don't really have any surviving source material. And there's the story of, Suna and the chariot with being chased by the wolves, or Sol. Sol. I'm sorry, my mind's not the best on mythological memory at the moment. But essentially, there is like a mythos about the sun, but it's not really deified so much in the surviving source material. And then you also have Balder, who is considered the bright god, the shining god, the good god. And so some people attribute him to like Apollo and therefore also to the sun. And then you also have like the realm of fire, Muspel and like Muspelheim, and like the fire giants and Surtur. But those are not necessarily considered good things. Like typically people consider the fire giants to be like very chaotic energies. And so I don't think that would have been something that attribute to the sun. I think most people in the ancient past were like, oh, thank you, sun,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I
no,
mean, giants sound a bit chaotic at the best of times, but fire giant sounds like a real problem in a village.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that definitely encompasses like wildfires and fires that burn
Yeah,
down houses more than to
yeah.
the fireball in the sky. But it is interesting because we obviously, like again, like in the Bronze Age, like they were making clear artifacts that were like, this is the sun is dope, like this is the god.
We
And we
love
see
the
that,
sun.
yeah, like we see that in the Celtic world as well. Like the Celtic world had very similar artifacts of the Bronze Age, worshiping the sun. We had the
Yeah,
solar cross come from this time. You had the shields that look very sun oriented, lots of
yeah.
gold. And I mean, gold is usually associated with the sun. So it seems like, again, this is where I think the transition was happening, is most of the written source material of both the Irish Celtic world and the Norse world comes from the Viking Age or later the Iron Age, when they were starting to move away as just this identity of farmers, but to the identity of kings and to warriors and clans. And so I think the identity of like the sun was less important because we were no longer talking about the religion of the people who worship the sun.
Right. Yeah, that was way, way before, really, wasn't it? When we sort of think about megalithic structures and the
Yeah,
Neolithic eras. I mean, we know our ancestors in England here were certainly worshipping the sun because of things like Stonehenge and the alignment with the sun, the rising of the sun and summer solstice.
yeah.
But we don't know anything about it. It's just I find it quite heartbreaking that we have very little information about what it was exactly that they were worshipping, or what that looked like, or what their ceremonies and rituals might have been.
Yeah.
But it certainly would have been around the sun, wouldn't it, as a
Well,
central
and obviously
focus?
sunrises and sunsets. that
Yeah.
is obviously, right now, like where the sun is in the sky for, me and you, it's not really it's like a kind of an ambiguous point. Oh, it's in the sky. But it becomes so much more dramatic when it gets lower and it gets closer to the earth. And to the ancient people who might not have necessarily recognized how far away the sun is, it's like, ooh, the sun is touching the earth as it sets and rises. And so obviously
Yeah.
that would have been, important to them.
Yeah. So magic, eh? Oh, goodness. So I suppose this nice little lead on from this subject is thinking about that vital life force and being at the peak of one's year, the midsummer of oneself, and celebrating, the things that you're good at and your skills that you're bringing into the world. Um, and of course, we've both just done retreats, which I consider to be us at the peak, the midsummer
Mm.
of what we can offer to the world. But yeah, we haven't had a proper chat about it yet, so
Yeah, yeah.
I'm curious to ask how your retreat went. How was it?
Yeah, before we get too much into that, I mean, you just made me think, this of looking into your life as the seasons, I think is a very
Mm,
powerful thing to do, and recognize, the commonalities to it. And so, like both you and I, we're not in spring anymore. As much as we want to say we are in the
yeah,
summer months of our lives. Whereas, we're getting into the work. That's what summer's for, is you have long
yeah,
days, it's warm, there's always opportunities, and so we're putting in the work. And then once you kind of get into the autumn, the twilight, the closing into the twilight, it's really beautiful. Everyone loves autumn. And
yeah,
I think a lot of people lose sight of that, is they think the spring and summer months of your lives are the only thing that matters. And it's like, no, I've met so many beautiful, wonderful, colorful people who are in their 50s, 60s, maybe late 40s, whatever you want to consider the autumn years of your life, that just exude this beautifulness to it. Like, yes, their physical self is starting to fall apart, but there's still such a beauty to it. And then, of course, with winter, it's just such a different thing. You become the elder, the wise one. And I think when we look at the celebrations, we look at the pagan festivals, they really do reflect this in ourselves as well. Is like the Yule months are more about the elders, whereas the summer months are more about
yeah.
youth and the people in their 20s, their 30s who are just living life day to day.
That's so true. What a gorgeous reminder of the cyclical way that we're tied into the seasons. Yeah, it's and like you said, there's so much. I mean, autumn is, I think, probably my favorite really
Yeah.
now
Oh,
as
I
I'm
can't wait to
looking.
be in like my 40s, 50s, and 60s. Like, I feel like that's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm over here like, I've always hated summer.
Ah, bit too much. Got too much work to do.
It's too hot.
But
Yeah.
at least we've got the vitality and the energy to do it, right? I suppose that's the joy of it all.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. For sure. But yeah, as far as retreats go, I think. Well, no. Before we get there, how was Beltane in Glastonbury? I don't think we talked about it on the podcast yet.
Yeah, we did a little sort of a little bit of about what would happen in
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Glastonbury
How was it
Beltane.
this year?
Yeah, it was really vibrant. It was beautiful. We had a really stunning procession, and the days before leading up to it were really sacred. Yeah, really, really special. It always feels so like the veil grows very thin on the lands here around
Hmm.
Beltane, and you kind of feel the magic for quite a few days either side of Beltane. So I feel like we're through that portal now and deepening in towards the solstice on the 21st, which has been lovely because we've had the procession of the druids. They come and gather here from the Order of Bards, and it's called Obod, the
Yeah.
association here, and they all gather on Glastonbury tour a few times of the year. So that was wonderful seeing them all in their white robes parading along Glastonbury High Street with their staffs, and um, the charging of the land begins from that point really. So all the way through June, we now get this rising of energy, the kind of the fulfillment of the season.
Yeah. I was seeing a lot of really good videos come out from it. It looked like the procession up the high street was really nice.
Yeah, yeah, it's stunning. And actually, I personally know the May King and Queen this year, and it was just beautiful watching them, actually becoming wedded. It's an official hand fasting when they do it here in Glastonbury.
Oh wait, so it was actually a couple, like they actually got married as the.
Yeah,
Oh, that's really cool. Would I have
I
met them in my time there?
know. What's that?
Did I meet them when I was there? I mean, I'm sure I
I
like saw
don't
them at
believe
some
you
point.
did actually. I don't believe you did. But yeah, they're well known in the community, and they're both real pillars of the community as well, which was so it's really nice to see them being celebrated and elevated in such a way.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
what
did you help dig the hole?
I did,
Yeah,
yeah. So all
yeah,
the women
yeah.
singing together the day before, that was really special and sacred. And I did actually, I had my mum and dad with me for Beltane this year, even though they are not pagan in the slightest. They're very open-minded, which I'm incredibly grateful for. And so that was a good chuckle as well. Lots of jokes about why can't they get the maypole up on time and all of these little
Everyone suffers a
things.
little bit from that from time to time.
Yeah, exactly. So lots of good banter with my family that day.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's one thing I actually forgot to mention as well with Midsummer in Sweden is like the maypole traditions and the maypole dances and stuff. Now, this possibly, like, I think the earliest date I saw was like the 13 or 1400s of the origins of this, but that's just because that's where we have surviving source material of a maypole existing. It doesn't mean it didn't exist before then. It's just scholars won't say it did because we don't have proof of it, and it's made of
Right.
wood and often gets recycled. So the
Yeah.
chances of finding anything that survives in the time we didn't write things down and the time that things were made of wood is not likely. But
Yeah.
obviously, this tradition of dancing has been around for a very long time, and cultures around the world in summer. Like, I think the vast majority of summer festivals in the world involve dancing to some degree.
Yeah, absolutely. That coming together, and like we were saying before, those lovely trance states that you can access through movement. They become so much more sort of prolific, I think, in traditions around this time of year. The idea of getting together and stomping around, and yeah, there's a lot that presumably with the midsummer traditions as well, the dancing and the
Yeah.
frivolity.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. And then of course I love my Spank Rudines song that is like the fun song at Midsummer is like you have everyone. It's like a kid's song, but I think that's what the maypole is seen as a little bit more today is like the kid thing.
yeah.
Um, but it still looks like, I mean, I've seen plenty of videos online of adults doing it too, but like small Grudina is like, the frogs have no tails, they have no ears, they're silly looking. Let's dance around like frogs. And it's really cute. And I make the
Oh,
community here in the States do that now. So we actually have our Midsummer celebration next weekend
oh,
here in Ohio.
amazing.
Yeah, so we'll have a maypole
And
and we'll
what?
do small Grudina.
So you do a maypole for midsummer as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's, with the Scandinavian world, there is no Beltane. And so this would be the first maypole, yeah, celebration.
Yeah. And I suppose because your retreat was so close to, well, both of our retreats were very close to Beltane, did that encompass a lot of the kind of midsummer Beltane aspects to it in terms of the rituals you were doing, or?
Well, yeah, mine was completely different. So mine had nothing to do with Beltane or the seasons or anything like that. It was purely exploratory. It was really, really interesting. I basically, I knew I wanted to do some kind of shamanic spiritual retreat, like less so on the pagan side, more on like the shamanism side.
Yeah.
And so I was in the Edinburgh Museum I think it was right before I went to Glastonbury. And I was doing a little ceremony in the museum, like, singing to these rocks with the carvings of the Pictish animals on them. And it hit me what I wanted this retreat to
Mm.
be. And it was to connect to the Pictish animals through shamanic trance and journeying. And so the Pictish animals in particular, like the Picts in general, we know very little about, but they are the last true pagans of Scotland, because the Picts in around the 400s and 500s, the Irish started coming in from Ireland, the Gaels, and they started replacing the Picts, whether through war or raiding or just through immigration and all this, is eventually like the Scots we know today, the Gaelic language, the mythology of Scotland that survives is all from the immigrants from Ireland in the fourth, fifth, and sixth century. But the Picts were, from what we know, the last people who celebrated Scottish deities. But we know so little about them because they became Irish and Christian at the same time. So a lot of the beliefs of the Picts disappeared. But really, all we know is like a handful of stuff from the Romans, and then we know about their mysterious symbols they left behind, which are a mixture of really weird symbols like the one of my tattoo, which is the crescent and the V-rod, and then animals. And so obviously animals had played some important role, more than likely in their spirituality. And so with the modern things like core shamanism, Michael Harner stuff, but also the shamanism around the world, there is an emphasis on connecting to spirit animals. And so I went into this saying, okay, well, let's connect to these animals specifically and then ask them questions about ancient Scotland and see what happens. So that was kind of the blueprint of what we did for the weekend.
Oh, incredible. So actually like using the kind of animal energy to sort of embody it or to journey with them. Was it
Yeah,
similar like
a
that?
bit of both.
Mm.
So obviously with like core shamanism and, you know, and shamanism in general, you have like a spirit guide you connect with. So it wasn't necessarily about, you know, trying to find which one you connected with. It was, so you have to have a spirit animal of your own. So, you know, for me, it would, you know, be the turkey or the duck. And then you would go to that spirit animal in the spirit world, and you would draw the Pictish animal in the dirt, in the cave wall, whatever, in your vision. And you would tell your spirit guide, take me to this. Show me where this is. And so before we actually did any of the journeying, you know, we had a few meditations, we did a few practice rounds, we had a hape ceremony. I had everyone draw in the real world, like draw the animal they wanted to connect with. So some people was the wolf, the fish, someone wanted to connect with like this, you know, the Selkie spirit and all this. And then when they actually, you know, I was drumming, they went to the spirit world, and then they drew these animals. And the results we had were like insane. It was really, really cool.
What sort of thing came through?
So like, I don't want to share too much because obviously this is like people's individual journeys. So there's a few I won't necessarily share. But we had like my good friend Maya, who also helped me do the retreat. She handled like the food and everything. We did like a sacred meal. She did a really good job. She had a really intense weekend, so she decided to connect with what most people accept as the salmon. So there's a carving of a fish, and most people call it the Pictish salmon or the salmon. And so she kind of went into this with mentality of, ooh, I'm going to find a salmon spirit. And so she, you know, she drew it and then and found this fish in this river, and then started asking this fish questions. And it was super depressed. Like it was like, oh, you know, like, how are you? Like, oh, it's pointless anyways. Life's meaningless.
Oh, no.
And then she asked, she's like, well, are you a salmon? And it was like, oh, no, I'm not a salmon. And it was just super, super depressed. And she, you know, and then she was like, well, are you a trout? And it was like, you're a little closer, but no. And then she kept looking into it and, you know, asking it questions. And like the only thing it really gave her is like the reason it was so depressed is because its native habitat had been destroyed. And it was showing that like where it normally lives, it can no longer live in. And so afterwards, we started doing research. We found out that there's a fish in Scotland that used to be native there, and they're trying to reintroduce it. But because of the deforestation of Scotland and the destruction of the local ecology, this particular fish can no longer live in Scotland, and it's called the poan. And then you look up the picture of a poan, and it's identical to the carving of the Picts.
What the hell? That's crazy.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you're actually channeling like the state of the ecology of the land.
Yeah, yeah, that was really big for me as well. Like in my individual journey, I connected with the boar spirit, and the boar spirit showed me, because there's no longer wild boar in Scotland, obviously, but it used to be a very, very prominent part of Scotland, even only a few hundred years ago, and doing boar hunts and boars being a part of the environment. And even though boars now are kind of just seen, oh, it's just a big pig, like no, boars used to be such an important symbol, not only to just like the everyday person, but also to royalty. Like there was entire clans named after the boar. You know, the gods Freyr and Freya in Scandinavia are, you know, associated with the boar. And there was even an identity, like everyone knows about like the Altheidenar or the Berserkir, like the people who shapeshifted in Scandinavian mythos and legend. But there was also a group of those people who were also associated and shapeshifted into boars. Which is really,
that's really fascinating. So there's a lot of that in Celtic folklore as well,
yeah.
especially the Mabinogian, like people being turned into pigs, and pigs seem to be very sacred to the Celts as well. And I've always wondered, like, I wonder why pigs? What is it about pigs and boars that is so sacred, or would have been particularly meaningful in those days?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just because of how fierce they were, because they were very dangerous. You know, a lot of people associate the same thing with like a shark. Everyone looks at a shark like, oh, this is the most dangerous thing in the ocean. It's like, it's not. Like the shark kills far less people than like other things in the ocean. But it gets labeled this kind of like scary thing. And it's the same with like wolves or bears. It's like bears and wolves, unless you really want to fuck with them, like will leave you alone. But boar, like wild boar, will decide to kill you just because they're bored. Yeah, and so I think,
right. They
so I
just want
think,
something to do for the day, and they're like,
right,
oh, we'll strike
and
something
they'll
up,
eat
you know?
anything. Like the boars, if they're hungry enough, will eat each other. Like they're
Oh my
very,
God.
very fierce creatures, but also they can eat anything. You know, they're the ones that, you know, find the truffles and things like that, and, you know, rummage around. And so I think when people were looking at something that symbolized strength and courage, they looked towards the boar because the boar was such a fierce presence in the wildlands of Scotland, of England. And that's one of the reasons they were hunted. And it was seen as a challenge to hunt them because it was so easy to get killed by them. So I think they were almost seen
Right.
as
So that would have
equals for a very long time.
they're almost like an apex predator. Who
Yeah.
knew?
Yeah, because like I know one of the strategies in the early days before like horses became really big in boar hunts is like the way to kill a boar was to be in a tree with a spear and waiting for the boar to like walk under you, and then you just jumped on top of it with the spear and hope that you hit it like in the heart and killed it in one hit. And so like to be a
Oh my
boar
goodness.
hunter in the past would have been like a super hair-raising job. And it would only take someone with like huge testicles to do.
So it would have been connected with like the most elite of warriors, I suppose. If you
Yeah.
think of it like that, that makes sense why it then becomes this sort of prestige animal. Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
And
No,
with
good.
your retreat and people going into these meditations, do you find was it quite easy to lead people into seeing in trance states, or because I mean it comes naturally to people like you because we're doing it for years, but I always wonder with people coming to retreats, how do you kind of lead them into it?
Yeah, yeah. So when it comes to like this, like one of the prerequisites was that you need to have your own spirit animal. Like you need to have already done this. This is kind of intermediate stuff. Like this Pictish workshop was not beginner. And now we did have some people, it was like their first time, they didn't have spirit animals already. And so the first day we had to help them get spirit animals. And there's a few different techniques you can use. Obviously drumming is the main thing, drumming or rattles, having that, that fast rhythm. But the main one, and I think this is a Harnerism, some from course shamanism, is visualizing some form of cave. And so it's one part visualization, and I think this is where it's different. So like there's astral projection, and then there's shamanic journeying. Astral projection, at least from my understanding, is where you're kind of forcing things a little bit, and you're like, I'm going to go to Mars, and you really have to like use your imagination to make it happen. Whereas a spirit journey to me is more of like you do need a spark. You do need something to light the fire. But once you light the fire goes on its own. Whereas shamanic, like astral projection is more like watching a TV show.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and
So
it
like,
comes from outside of oneself rather than within oneself. Maybe that's
yeah,
the key difference.
yeah. Well, it's kind of both. Is yeah, is with the shamanic journeying, because once you visualize the cave and it's like, okay, I picture this cave, I've been here. What you have to look for is this kind of like pool. Like you start seeing it, you start feeling it, where it's like, oh, I kind of want to go in there. And in your mind, you disassociate from it being something in your mind anymore, and you just go into the cave, and you let yourself kind of fall into it and see what comes. And before you know it, you start seeing things that you are not telling your mind to make up. And you start seeing things like, oh, I'm in this cave, there's water everywhere. And then, for me, when I first found the duck spirit, all of a sudden the duck's like swimming up to me in the cave. And it's like, well, I'm not picturing that. Why is there a duck in the cave? And you start communicating with the duck, like, why are you here? And so, yeah, you do need that initial spark. And this is why it's so important to do like cleanses before you go, because if you are watching Netflix, you're on your phone a bunch right before you get to a retreat, you're going to really, really struggle to find these visuals and really struggle to make a connection. And so like there's one big thing I tell everyone before any of these like shamanic journeying retreats is you have to disconnect. Like it's not like a maybe. It's like, no, you must disconnect before you do these things. You cannot be watching Netflix 6 hours before you come to these things. I really recommend about a week of digital detoxing before you do any of this work. Because that's the thing, like people doing this kind of work 1,000 years ago, the people still doing this work now in the jungles and in the mountains and in Mongolia and in South America, they're disconnected. That's why they can see these things, is because they're always connected to this energy, this life force. And so I think that's the biggest thing, is if someone's never done this work before, I think many people can do this work. Most people can, but you really have to lean into it and be able to disconnect so you can connect to the spirit world.
Absolutely. And I think that can be one of the hardest things, is getting people to disconnect in the first place. And like you said, the prep work around that. I noticed with my retreat as well, I had people were potentially struggling with seeing stuff visually. So when the way that I do my retreat is we kind of explore the 4 different elements. So we go up and we connect to the sky gods, and we try and read the omens of the clouds and the birds and the sky. And then we might go down to the ground and we connect with the land and we drum and we try and meet the spirit animal in the spirit world. And then reading the fire, learning to divine with through the flames and doing rituals with the fire, you know, and then the water, divining from, can you hear the voices in the water, the sounds, the auditory things. And I found that to be really useful because, you know, it can be easy to assume that everybody can just channel visually, but because everybody's so different, not everybody is visual, and so it felt really important to have those different ways that people could go into trance or could channel, whether it was auditory or the senses of the body or through sound or through visuals. And it was so beautiful because at the beginning there was quite a lot of people that were like, oh, I can't do it, you know, I'm not getting anything. And I was saying to them, don't worry, you know, by the end of the retreat, you'll be channeling and you'll be able to access trance. You've just got to find your element or your way of doing it, your kind of thing that works for you. And by the end, it was just so beautiful because everyone had managed to do it. And that moment of realization where they're like, I'm seeing stuff, I'm journeying, it's actually happening. Really
Yeah,
magic. People grow into themselves and blossom on these retreats, isn't it? So
yeah,
magic.
for sure. And I think with two of the people that, and this is something they bond over, Maya, one of them, and then Abigail, I'm sure she doesn't mind me mentioning her, both of them struggle because they don't have really good internal dialogue as far as like, you know, internal visualization. Like they really struggle like having, like visualizing things. And so they said that this kind of work is always hard for them. And one of the things they were saying that helps is it's often feelings less so than visualizations for them. It's just like, oh, you have a feeling or a memory, almost like you're having that weird, like you smell something again, and it reminds you of your childhood. They're like, they have more sensations like that than necessarily seeing things.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? How everyone's so unique. But it's really wonderful knowing that we can still tap into these sort of long lost gifts that we all have the ability to tap into. And I think it's a nice reminder because there's a lot in the spiritual community about the idea of certain people being blessed or gifted and other people not being, and a hierarchy of healer and then community. But actually, I think a lot of the kind of the belief system within the pagan world and the Norse and the Celtic traditions is the idea that everyone has the ability to step into that world, whether it's through bardism or druidry or trance or whatever, you know, they can do it in their own way. And it's a human thing that we've forgotten. It's an old ancestral way of being and connecting to the spirit of the earth that we've forgotten.
Well, it is interesting because like one of the things I was taught is there's a difference between someone who is a journeyer, is someone who's like going to the spirit world to commune with spirits, and someone who almost doesn't have a control over it. It's like the medium or like the vulva, like the people who just receive messages without necessarily wanting it. And nowadays, in psychology, these people often get labeled as crazy or insane, and they're kind of thrown into life with this really negative attitude towards this. But in the ancient past, people like this were actually seen as more divine. And so you had people that were like seen as like, oh, hey, they get visions of the future, so I go to them and they help divine the future, and they've been given this gift. And of course, now we look at these things and we're like, oh yeah, it's a mental thing. But I think
it's heartbreaking.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
wonder how many shamans we've locked away in hospitals in the
Oh,
West.
for sure.
You know, it's tragic, isn't it? It's really,
Yeah.
really tragic. And it's also so typical that the shaman in any culture would live on the outskirts of society and not be able to integrate because they're so in their own world. But that's seen as like somebody self-isolating, somebody who's mad now. It's like, these are all shamanic qualities, even that, you know.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think, and everyone has the ability to, I think we're all born with gifts, of course. And then, we have innate talents to ourselves and we're all unique. But then, of course, we can train and become good in something. And so for me, like I was just talking to someone about this the other day, like I actually was quite introverted when I was younger. Like I was, kind of bullied. I was like this little nerdy kid and I didn't have a lot of friends. And yeah, and like I had an afro and I was a little chubby, so I wasn't like, I don't know, I was just very different. And now I sit with myself, I'm like, I'm a fucking extrovert now. Like I just like, I crave to be around people. And it's like, how has this change happened? It's just because I've kind of trained myself to do this. Not everyone can, and it's taken me years. But especially, my time in Glastonbury definitely made me realize, I'm like, holy shit, I'm an extrovert now.
Oh, isn't that funny? I feel like I've done the reverse journey. I started off quite extrovert through my teen years and stuff. And then as I've gotten older, I really love being alone. I really value that
Yeah.
time and that calm and that.
Yeah,
That
and that's going to give
self-reflection.
you a different set of gifts as well to, to help yourself and to help others. And so, yeah, it is a shame that, and I think this is a big conversation in our world in general is, someone is born and it's like, oh, they don't fit the gifts that society likes. They don't fit into the box of they can fit into a classroom with 30 people. They can work a 9-to-5 job. They can deal with high stressful situations. Like, those things are seen as a weakness of society if you can't survive them because our society demands that you live that way. But everyone
Yeah.
is born differently and everyone does have different abilities to connect. And just because they might not be able to sit in a classroom with 30 people for 8 hours a day or sit into an office for 8 hours a day doesn't mean they don't have gifts. It's just we're not living in a world now that cultivates people with different gifts than the 9-to-5 office worker.
Absolutely. It's not sort of one rule fits all, is it? And I think when we start to sort of explore the different ways of bringing these gifts out of people, that's when people really flourish. They really come into themselves, and it's just so nice being able to be part of the safe space that orchestrates that at these retreats. I'm sure you'd agree with that. It's
Yeah, for
so
sure.
nice to watch that unfold.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is like,
Yeah.
even though you can have this idea of like the Pictish Animal Workshop that's why I created this retreat is because, it's kind of a selfish intention is I want us to figure out more about Scotland,
Yeah.
but everyone still walked away, regardless of connecting to the Pictish animals or not, everyone walked away learning more about themselves. And that's what's most
Yeah.
important.
Oh, gorgeous. I'm so glad it was a success. You'll be doing it next year, I imagine.
Yeah, I might try to do it here. So, yeah, I guess this is time I can plug a little bit as well. Like I've been working on my website for the last month, so I do have a website now. It has like a spiritual profile for me of things like I'm working on, and then it's going to have retreats outside of the Fellowship of Northern Traditions. The Fellowship of Northern Traditions, started as a pagan community. I want to make sure it stays that way. So I'm still going to be doing pagan retreats with them, focused on like the pagan gods, celebrating the seasonal changes, the Norse deities, and stuff like that. But I recognize that the shamanism stuff is kind of outside of that a little bit. Like it still mingles with it, but in order to do more shaman-specific things like this Pictish Animal Workshop, I wanted to kind of create my own space for that. And so I'm working on a retreat for I think fall is where it's going to take place now. I'm going to move it. We're going to do spirits of Appalachia. So the spirits of the mountain range in Kentucky and Tennessee, and connect to the animal spirits here, much like we did the animal spirits in Scotland. So it's going to be a little different, but still kind of same concept.
Oh, wow. I love that. So bringing it across the globe with you as well.
Yeah. Because I mean, the crazy thing is, this is something I've really been reflecting on. Is I have this deep love for Scotland. Got to travel across Ireland, and when you really look at it, the people that live in the area I'm from, the people that live in the Appalachian Mountains, are all descendants of Scots and Irish people. And
Yeah.
so there are more Scottish and Irish people in America than there are in Scotland and Ireland.
That's
Yeah, we just sound a
big
little different
claim.
over here.
But it's so true, because I get this as well. Most of the people that I work with that come over with the tourism in the summer and they want to do like the tree workshop with me, or the kind of the goddess tour here, or anything like that. These are people that are digging for the roots of their ancestry, and it's so hard to find apparently in America, and because they can't really connect with the land and the ruins and the things that this history comes from. So when they do travel across to England, they're so excited to learn. And yeah, I truly find actually Americans are my favorite clientele to work with for all the workshops that I do here. And it's just that enthusiasm that we take for granted as British people. Um,
Yeah, for
you
sure.
guys are you're having to work a bit harder to dig, and I think that comes through as the enthusiasm.
Well, and we have to make more of a sacrifice. For us to come over there to learn is expensive, and so
Massive.
we have
Yeah.
to. Again, me. I gave up an apartment. I gave up my life here essentially to go and learn over there. That's not
Yeah.
something everyone can do, and so it does. The
Yeah.
people, the Americans that are coming over there to explore their ancestry, to explore their roots, are doing it to great personal cost back here.
Right. What a
Yeah.
huge privilege. Wow. It's a big deal, isn't it? It's a really big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it must feel like a real homecoming, like actually being able to return to the land where your DNA and your ancestry comes from is huge,
Oh, yeah.
isn't it? Quite
Well,
emotional.
and you're not the first person to tell me either that, runs retreats in England. I was just interviewing a guy named Connor in Ireland, and he was saying that a lot of his workshops attracts a lot of Americans in Ireland. And he realized too, it's like, at first he was like, oh, bloody Americans coming over here trying to learn about Ireland, but then of course we were talking, he's like, but then you realize, how passionate they are about a place that
Yeah.
people born there aren't passionate about anymore. And so
Yeah.
it's not ultimately what we want. And I think in this world of conversations around immigration and all this stuff happening in Europe and America, it's like the most important thing is love and passion for a place. And that's all I ask of people is like, if you're going to be in
Yeah.
Scotland, fucking love it. I love that place. I'm
Yeah.
not from Scotland, but I went there and I loved it. And that's what's most important.
And there's something as well about being like being allowed to explore your ancestry, even if you're not born on that land. I think you're right with this kind of thing about immigration. There's this kind of horrible energy around this in the British Isles of like, unless you're born on this land, then you are not Celtic or you are not from this culture. And it's like, whoa, hang on. Probably 63% Celtic in their DNA if you're born in America. That's the
Yeah.
reality. And of course, you should be allowed to explore that.
Well,
And
not to mention that the entire Anglo-Celtic Isles are made up of immigrants from various
yes,
series of like the
exactly.
entire Irish history is built on the a period of invasions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's this whole crossover, isn't it? The debate and quite political debate about, is Celtic a language or is Celtic a culture or is Celtic your DNA and your ancestry? And it's a little bit of all, I
Yeah,
think,
it's all
really.
above. One of the videos I recorded with Kevin when I was in Ireland is this identity and conversation around the term Celtic and what it means. And it's just so many different things. It's not
Yeah,
just one thing. And that's what makes it so
very
complicated.
broad. Yeah.
But like one of the things I brought up there that I was like, I was like, oh, I'm going to bring that up here. I need to talk to people here. Is if you think about it, like the whiskey here in Kentucky, bourbon. It's like, oh, it's bourbon, it's Kentucky whiskey. But isn't it not Celtic whiskey? Because it was made by immigrants from the Celtic world.
Oh, right. I see. Yeah. Well, then, yes.
Yeah, so bourbon
Even the
is
whiskey,
Celtic.
damn it.
Bluegrass music is Celtic because bluegrass music is an evolution of, trad Irish and Scottish folk music that came to America and changed a little bit. But at the end of the day, its origins are still Celtic.
Wow. Yeah, you're so right. That's exactly it. If you just sort of dig for the roots, you find that, they do sink into the soil here. And I think it's so nice to welcome all, isn't it? Welcome all to explore their ancestry. Why wouldn't you? And yeah, actually, even people where it's not their ancestry,
Yeah,
a lot
yeah.
of people message me saying, can I do this workshop? Because I'm not actually of Celtic ancestry. And I'm like, well, you're on planet Earth, so I guess that's a yes.
So this is the most baffling thing. So my Pictish animal retreat, of all the people there, I was probably the most Scottish.
Wow.
Like most people there, like like we had someone there from Lithuania, who very clearly had no like Scottish ancestry. We had, I think, 3 Americans there. So yeah, it was really weird that the Scottish workshop of all the people that went, no one actually was there who was Scottish. And that's the wild thing is, and it's the sad thing too, is because I do think it's not the blame of the people of England or Ireland or Scotland. I think they're kind of living in the society that's kind of making them, feel like their homeland is shit. So you can't blame them. But it's very hard to find people in Scotland in particular that are like, yeah, I really love it here, that were born there. Most people I encounter are like, it's kind of shit.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow, that really surprises me. I
It
would
wasn't.
expect all
Yeah,
the
it wasn't
opposite.
until I met Tom that I did the video with. Like Tom is from there. He's from Glasgow, I think originally the Glasgow region, and he's very passionate. His sister as well. His sister speaks the Gaelic language and stuff, and they both do a lot of really good work. But it really wasn't until I met them that I started finally meeting people. And maybe it's because like people that really genuinely care don't necessarily live in like Glasgow or Edinburgh. They kind of stay in those insular areas. Yeah, so you have to really get into the Highlands to find people that really love it. But these are still blanket statements. But yeah, it is just in general. I've spent a lot of time in Scotland now, and most people you would find that are like, yeah, I love it here. Scotland's great. They're not from there. It's baffling.
Interesting. Curiouser and curiouser.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Glastonbury as well. Like, a lot of people in Glastonbury weren't born there. Looking in a microcosm, most people came from different places.
It's a bit of a mix of both. Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's that thing of not being able to leave once you're here. That's what does it. People come to visit it as
Traps
a
you.
tourist thing, and then it traps you. Yeah. That's exactly it. Oh gosh.
Yeah,
But
but
we were
anything.
talking, weren't we, about potentially sort of bringing our skill sets together, potentially in Glastonbury or somewhere close by,
Yeah.
around the autumn period. So this is an interesting place, and actually a perfect platform to get a little bit of an idea about what people might want from us, what might people expect from a retreat that you and me are hosting.
Yeah.
Put it in the
I would.
comments.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. If you make it this far into the podcast, again, we have quite a few people that watch our podcast on YouTube. Yeah. Please put in the comments what you'd like to see if Kubi and I run a retreat. And I want to make it a kind of a goal at the latest by the end of July. But I like us to try by the end of June to get the plan together for a retreat for us, and like around October.
Definitely, it'll be really exciting. So obviously, we've both got this idea of like the connection with the spirit realm, the animal familiars and spirit animals, and then there's the exploration of the earth itself. I can hold down the tree energy, connecting to the trees here and learning the Ogham and the Druid stuff. But then there's also things like a lot of people have been requesting in Glastonbury. I don't know if it's the same where you are. There's almost like a need for grief tending or kind of communication with the ancestors, going deep into the bones of old pain and old trauma and releasing it through drumming and chanting and fire. So that there might be a few aspects of that, I imagine, that are required when we do a retreat or something that goes deep into the bones of ancestry.
Yeah, I think an ancestral healing workshop would be pretty good in general,
Right.
and then just finding a way to bring all that together. And and it could be like I think we kind of talked about, like we could try to pull in that Tim Raven guy, see if we can wrap him into it.
Tim Raven, if you're watching, we're gonna steal you.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's an absolute legend.
Yeah, and then of course we can get our now mutual friend Loki involved if we wanted as well.
Yeah, good old Loki, another legend. He's an absolute backbone of the community here.
Well, it's so funny that whenever I look back at my journal and I like wrote him in my journal, it's so funny reading it because it's like me and Loki today went and got coffee.
Yeah, I forget it's actually just not a normal name, is it?
Yeah. Yeah. So if you want to come and hang out with Loki in Glastonbury, come hang out with us.
Like a normal day out.
Yeah. I've been in the White Springs with him,
Yeah.
Oh, I do miss
Oh
the White
gosh.
Springs.
Oh, I've got a big lawnmower man coming. If you can hear some beeping, it's just that.
So
It's going to reverse onto me and mow over my space in a minute. It's when you think you're having a peaceful afternoon in the Abbey.
Oh, I feel like they're always mowing the damn lawn in there.
I know.
Yeah. So, anything else you want to say about your retreat? And how it went?
I mean, the most beautiful aspect, I think, was there was a few really gorgeous moments. I mean, we had some incredible food, which is for me always a highlight. We had a Katie Wild doing the cooking in our retreat, and I highly recommend her for anyone that is doing retreats in England. She's sort of carries the essence of the wild woman herself, so she was essential as a part of the retreat. But a couple of my favorite moments was we made an oak tincture out of an oak tree near Gog and Magog, and this beautiful moment where people could actually feel tree energy for the first time. They were connecting with it and receiving sort of symbols or feelings from this tree, and you realize like this is such a deep part of being a human being, but it's one we completely don't know we have, or it's taken for granted. And yeah, people rebonding with the trees was really special part. And the other really gorgeous thing we did, we had this gorgeous attic space which we lit with candles, and we called in the Arwen, which is almost, I would say, like the equivalent of the Holy Spirit in Christianity.
Yeah.
The Arwen is like the essence of poetic inspiration and the life force of the Celtic people. And we were chanting the Arwen with the drums, and we made this kind of astral vision tea that we drank for it, and began sound weaving, like sort of harmonizing with one another and creating these ethereal, otherworldly sounds. People were in tears, and they'd never experienced that kind of beauty within themselves, or that feeling that happens when people do sound weave, and a sort of an energetic portal begins to be felt opening up between everyone. So that was really special. Like those were two of my favorite highlights, I think, from it. And
oh, nice.
Yeah,
you were like one of the youngest ones there, weren't you?
Yeah. Most of the people that came were, sort of middle-aged women that are you know, they've got their own wisdom because they're starting to carry the energy of the crone and the elder, the kind of the autumn to
The autumn
winter
energy.
season. Yeah. And you know, it's but they were so open and willing to learn, and despite being elders of you know, the worldly sense, they were still beginners in the spiritual sense. So it was
Yeah.
really special having them there. Yeah.
Yeah, well, good. Yeah. So, how long was it? How many days was it?
It was 4 days, 3 nights. But we'll definitely be doing it again next year. So
Yeah, that's good.
yeah, I can't wait for that. Really exciting.
Yeah, what do you have coming up in the future for you? I mean, obviously Glastonbury is getting busy now with the summertime.
Yeah, so I've got all of my summertime workshops. I do my wand making day ceremonies. I do a druidic tree day where I sort of get guided around the trees in the abbey and connect to them and make tree tea and tinctures.
Treaty.
Um, I've recently released a goddess workshop day, which is connected to working with the Holy Hawthorn and the energies of Mary Magdalene, kind of druidic priestess energies, and the sacred sites that encompass all of that in Glastonbury. And then, most importantly, my favorite one is the teaching of the druid tree wisdom and that life path, the Ogham. So I do that as an online course for anybody that's interested. It's you get to speak to me once a month, and we talk about the folklore and all the exciting rituals and things you can make from each tree whilst you're channeling its wisdom.
So what you're telling me is people can listen to you talk for 2 times a month now. They can listen to the podcast and they can do
Yeah,
this.
spoiling you all. I think you can handle it, of course. But yeah, what about you? Have you got some good stuff coming up for the summer?
Yeah, for the most part, I'm going to, yeah, we have the Midsummer next weekend for the Fellowship of Northern Traditions, so I'll be going there and just helping run that and doing a few of the ceremonies. And I mean, we still have spots if people want to. It's only $50. It's really cheap. It's just camping. It's just like in this big field next to a forest, and so yeah, we're just gonna have a good midsummer time. The main theme of this one is going to be sacred spaces. So creating sacred spaces throughout the forest and the area for people to reflect and connect and things like that. And we'll be doing the midsummer dancing. And then the next planned thing, I don't think will be until the autumn, but I'll probably at least attend another Fellowship of Northern Traditions retreat. Probably towards, I think we're doing one in New York in August. So I'm going to be probably doing that. But yeah, next in the autumn's where things are going to get really busy because I'll probably do the Spirits of Appalachia retreat, and then after that we'll have I'll run the Fellowship of Northern Traditions like Samhain event or the fall event, and then I am doing a Welsh retreat now that we've kind of talked about. That's on my website as well, and so I'll be doing that with like 6 other people, and that's going to be like towards the end of October. So that's still got spots open for it. So that'll be down below, of course. Yeah, so lots of things cooking. Right now, all I do is edit these videos I made in Ireland.
Oh, enjoy the calm while it lasts.
I don't know. Yeah, it doesn't last very long in my life.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nice to keep busy. It's nice to have,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I
Work
gave
hard, play
myself
hard.
I gave myself 1 day of rest
Rule.
before I started working on the videos. I had like
Yeah.
I flew back in. I got here like late Saturday, and then Sunday I just kind of died, and then I kind of got back in and started like editing by Monday.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no rest for the wicked, eh? I feel like you need a spa week, Jacob.
Well,
You need to have that week of spa.
yeah, I mean, I will say I'm grateful to be staying with my parents at the moment because they do have a pool. So I have.
Oh, well, that's almost a
Yeah,
spa,
I'm
isn't
looking at it right
it?
now.
Yeah. Oh, I hope you do get a good rest because I know you've been very busy running around
Yeah.
the planet.
Oh my gosh, yeah, Ireland was crazy. Yeah, 2 weeks it was really like 3 weeks in a camper van was pretty wild.
Oh,
Camper van dream is an interesting one. There was definitely moments I liked, but by the end I was really ready to be out of that thing.
bet. Yeah. 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 Nice to get back into a house. Electricity is fun.
Well, it had a hob, it had a fridge, it had a sink, but it didn't have like a toilet. So we would always have to find somewhere in the mornings.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 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 Oh, such fun.
Yeah, well, I think we're well over an hour as always, so we could probably end it, I think.
It's all right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
Oh, well, good
anything
to
else you want
see you
to?
as always.
Yeah, anything else you want to share with the people before we close out?
I can't think of anything. just that we'll put our links below, won't we? If you want to do
Yeah, as
any of
always.
our workshops online or any retreats we have coming up, just to give them a little bit of an exploration. You've got a website now as well,
Yeah,
which is
yeah. I'll have to send it to
exciting.
you. It looks pretty nice. I like it. Yeah.
Nice. Congrats. You know
Yeah.
you've made it when you've got a website, Jacob.
This is only like my third website. No, yeah, I had one for my old photography days, but yeah, it's shut down now.
Yeah. Oh.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for this month's episode of the Tree of Life podcast. We'll see you next month, and we'll figure out what in the world to talk about in July, because July's kind of a dry pagan month. There's not a lot of pagan-y things in July, I feel like.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
Yeah,
everyone's
not
just in
not
the
too much
fields.
going on. Yeah, that's it. Everyone's just making sweet love in the fields in July.
Oh, it's too hot.
Oh gosh. But yeah,
All
leave
right.
us any ideas that you have for our retreat as well, because we're going to start dream weaving that together. So anything that's great, stick it in the comments. That'd be good to know.
All right. Well, thank you everyone, and we'll see you in the next month. Bye-bye.
Bye.